this point, Hitoshi had just accepted that confusion was his default emotion. Being kidnapped and practically adopted by two kids his own age who turned out to be mad scientist gremlins had thrown him for a loop, sure, but that was nothing in comparison to whatever this situation was. At least he had confirmation that he'd made it into the hero course, but going home with his teachers who may or may not be waiting for him to go off the rails was not what he'd had in mind when he'd woken up yesterday. He had the sneaking suspicion that Eraserhead hadn't been planning on it either. Sure, he hid his surprise well, but Hitoshi had seen the brief flash of surprise and maybe panic that had passed over his face before he managed to hide it. He didn't know why it hurt so much that Eraserhead was scared of him. Everyone was, so this shouldn't be any different, but in the few times they'd interacted in the past, Hitoshi hadn't noticed any hesitance to talk to him, but from his obvious panic and what Nedzu and told his former foster parents, they were doing this to make sure that he didn't get tempted to switch sides. It hurt to know that, except for Mei and Izuku, Ue really wasn't that different after all. Hitoshi straightened his tie and pushed those thoughts from his mind. He could get through this. He always did. It was just a matter of fading into the background and not talking more than he had to. As long as he behaved, Eraserhead wouldn't have any reason to kick him out of his house and by extension probably the hero course as well. No pressure. Despite the fact that he knew this was just a precautionary arrangement, it was still trippy to leave his room and see Eraserhead and present Mike sitting at the kitchen table eating breakfast. It was like running into his teachers at the grocery store, but worse. Present Mike grinned as he came into the room, practically bouncing in his seat with excess energy. Hey there, little listener. How'd you sleep? Hitoshi shrugged and Eraserhead slapped Mike upside the head, probably to shut him up so he wouldn't encourage Hitoshi to say anything. Don't be so loud, Zashi. The kid just woke up. Besides, it'd be a miracle if he slept at all with the way you snore. Hey. Mike squawked. Hitoshi chuckled despite himself, then froze. Laughing didn't really count for his quirk, but did his teachers know that? Would they get angry at him? He looked up hesitantly, only to see Eraserhead smiling like he'd won something and Mike shaking his head in amusement. Okay, so they were glad he'd laughed at their joke, and he wasn't going to get in trouble for laughing. Good to know. Do you want any breakfast? Eraserhead asked, frowning when Hitoshi shook his head. Are you sure? We're having omelets, but we can make you something else if you'd like. Hitoshi just shook his head again. He didn't want to cause any trouble on his first day, and he never really got hungry until later anyway. There was always lunch, and Izuku had a stash of snacks in his room for emergencies anyway. He was fine. Eraserhead sighed heavily, while Mike looked worried and Hitoshi had the sinking feeling he'd done something wrong, but it was too late to take back his decision, so he just adjusted his backpack and waited for them to say something else. Was he supposed to walk to school or wait to leave with them? What was the protocol when you were living with your teachers? After another minute or two of heavy silence, Mike stood up and took his plate to the sink. All right, you ready to go, little listener? Hitoshi nodded as Eraserhead stood and grabbed his keys. Let's go then. It's your first day in the hero course, so it's gonna be a long day. Your new classmates are a bunch of annoying brats, but you're used to dealing with Powerloader's gremlins, so it'll be nothing new. Hitoshi snickered. It was always funny to see how the teachers reacted to Mei and Izuku. It was almost funnier than seeing the students' reactions, which was also hilarious. Eraserhead had seemed to support the two during the sports festival, so maybe living here wouldn't be too bad, even if they were just waiting for him to mess up and turn villain. As long as he respected Hitoshi's friends, that was the important part. Mike talked the entire drive to Ue, and Hitoshi was almost tempted to ask him a question just to get him to shut up. Eraserhead nodded along and made interested hums at all the right places, but obviously wasn't fully listening to what Mike was saying. The weird part was that Mike seemed to know that and was totally fine with it. It was like the two had this silent agreement that Mike could talk as much as he wanted about everything under the sun and Eraserhead would just be there. He could see Mei and Izuku doing that too, but they would probably have to take turns as the listener, otherwise neither of them would ever shut up. When they got to the school, Mike kissed Eraserhead on the cheek, which surprised Hitoshi even though they lived together, and left toward the general education part of the building. Hitoshi almost followed him out of habit, only to find himself being yanked back by Eraserhead's capture weapon around his waist. When he turned back, Eraserhead was just raising an amused eyebrow at him. Just where do you think you're going? You're in the hero course now, or did you forget? Hitoshi slammed his mouth shut. Just because he was at UA didn't mean he was welcome to speak. This guy was still suspicious of him. He glanced up at Eraser hesitantly, but to his surprise, instead of getting angry, Eraserhead's face had softened into something like pity or maybe understanding. You know you're always allowed to talk here, right? No one's going to force you, of course, but neither Mike nor I are ever going to punish you for talking. You're going to be a hero with that quirk, so it would be illogical to restrict your usage of it. Do I make myself clear? Hitoshi nodded again and Eraserhead just sighed and started walking toward 1A. It was a nice sentiment, but it could also be a trap. It didn't seem very hero-like to bait him like that, but then again, Eraserhead was infamous for his logical ruses, so it was better to stay on the safe side for now. Eraserhead paused for a moment when they reached the door to 1A. By the way, you didn't ever actually write those apology letters your foster father wanted you to, did you? Hitoshi nodded, confused. They were tucked away in this bag, and he wasn't looking forward to delivering them, but he was glad he'd actually written them, if Eraser was asking. But then again, that also meant that he couldn't just conveniently forget to deliver them or anything. Rip them up. Eraserhead scowled and Hitoshi did a double take. Or have Hatsume explode them or something. I don't care. Before Hitoshi could even react to that, much less process, Eraserhead pushed open the door and walked into the classroom. Hitoshi's eyes widened as he took in the chaos happening in the class and then widened even more when everyone just stopped the moment they saw Eraserhead open the door. Good morning, brats. Eraserhead announced. Good job on the sports festival, but don't get too cozy, your torture is just beginning. Shinso, you're in the empty seat. Let's get started. His initial judgment of the man had definitely been correct. He was even scarier than Izuku. And yeah, I heard he was totally creeping on some of the third years over the break. Mina shuddered. I almost wish there hadn't been an empty seat so you could have kicked him out, Shinso. Hitoshi wasn't quite sure how he'd ended up walking to lunch with a group of students from 1A, but as soon as class ended, Uraraka had pretty much immediately grabbed his hand and started dragging him along, most of the girls from the class falling into pace and filling the air with gossip. He was starting to relax a little more now that he wasn't around Eraser. Well, Aizawa, who considering his instructions about the letters might not actually be judging him. Still, he didn't want to mess up his chances now that he was finally in the hero course, so it was better to err on the side of caution, at least around the hero course students. Yeah, Manetta's pretty bad. Jiro laughed. But at least. What the actual? He practically ran into Jiro's back as she stopped suddenly in the middle of the hall. He looked to see what had shocked her and somehow wasn't really surprised to see Mei and Izuku hanging from the ceiling, dust in their hair as they grinned at them. Extra credit, Kun. You made it in. His classmates, with the exception of Uraraka, gaped at them and a couple looked around in confusion trying to figure out who they were talking about. Izuku took a breath to say something else, onto to sneeze violently, which wouldn't have been nearly as bad if he'd actually been hanging onto anything. Instead, he probably would have fallen out of the ceiling if Uraraka hadn't removed his gravity in time. Thank Uraraka. Izuku smiled brightly, still upside down as Mei started dragging him back up into the ceiling and Uraraka returned his gravity. Hitoshi, you have to see this. It's so cool. Hitoshi was just trying not to laugh as both Mei and Izuku reached down, grabbing one arm each and just pulled him up into the ceiling. He tried to imagine how this must look to anyone who wasn't familiar with his kidnappers, and that just made him laugh harder. He pulled himself up the rest of the way into the ceiling, and Izuku started shaking dust from his hair as May poked her head back down into the hallway. Don't worry, we'll return him after lunch. Just make sure he's back in time for class. Uraraka's voice echoed with laughter. Have fun and don't kill him before he can be a hero. Hitoshi's shoulders shook in laughter as May slammed the secret panel closed, cutting off the sound of his classmates freaking out as he turned to his kidnappers. So, what did you want to show me? We got into the tunnels. May's eyes were wide and he could see the crosshairs in her eyes zooming in and out as she looked behind him and took in every detail. Hitoshi just chuckled. I can see that. It took so long. Izuku rambled. Every single door is locked with a different puzzle, and we haven't even found all of them. Most of the doors out are also locked, which was kinda fun. We've been here since yesterday. What? Hitoshi crawled after them. He didn't know if all the tunnels were this small, but it wasn't really a problem for May and Izuku since they were pretty short. Did you even sleep? Not important. May waved a hand dismissively. We've been exploring. These tunnels lead everywhere. We can get to all the labs, even after hours, not to mention the practice grounds and the classrooms, the staff areas. But that's not even the best part. Izuku interrupted. Obviously, not many people ever find them, so some of the tunnels are pretty dusty, but Nedzu did design them to be explored. There's even. Oh, here we are. Hitoshi panicked slightly as May and Izuku literally just fell and disappeared. He moved forward more slowly and screamed when he realized that one of the floor panels was actually a hologram. He hit the floor with a small oof and rubbed his head as he looked around and found a nest? A half-dozen blankets were spread out across the floor and more were folded against the walls. There was a mini fridge and a cupboard that May was pulling cookies out of. Izuku poked his cheek and held out a takeout container from Lunch Rush. Is this where you guys slept? Hitoshi asked, taking the food. I mean, more power to you, but is it comfortable? Izuku shrugged. Some of the others are more so, but this one's more central and it has the fridge. Got it. Hitoshi nodded and took a bite of his lunch. Yeah, confusion was definitely just his life now, but honestly, he wouldn't have it any other way. Chapter 42. Panic. Towards Uwabami, simply because she looked so effortlessly confident, but some hand-to-hand training would be helpful. Just because I can create weapons doesn't mean I always know how to use them. Do it. Mina yelled. We need more badass female combat heroes. I want to intern somewhere stealth-based, Kagakuri said. I may as well specialize in what I'm good at, right? Same here. Sue said. I've got an offer from Selkie, so I'll probably go there. Wouldn't it be awesome if we ended up at Gunhead Agency together, Shindig? Uraraka looked excited. I wonder if he takes multiple interns. Hitoshi shrugged. It would be nice to have a familiar face around, but he didn't want to hold Uraraka back at all. Even after all the training he'd done, he was still a new addition to the hero course and had a lot to catch up on. He was just hoping his internship would be enough to help him close the gap. I don't even know what I'm supposed to bring. May yelled, throwing a wrench across the room. Am I supposed to bring all my tools or will they have tools there that we can use? Oh my goodness, I bet their tools are like, top of the line. Who am I kidding? Of course they're the top of the line, it's Island. Hitoshi shook his head as he dodged another projectile. I'm sure you'll be fine, May. You're the top invention student in the school and Izuku is the only analysis student. Besides, you've already impressed them. That's what makes it so bad, extra credit boom. May's eyes were rapidly zooming in and out as she looked around the lab, trying to decide what to pack. They already have high expectations, and what if I don't live up to him? Izuku came up and gently put a hand on her arm. You'll be fine, May-chan. They'll love both you and your babies, I know it. Going to Island may be a lot of pressure, but we've done high pressure before, remember? We've helped fight actual villains, Mei-chan, so a few high-class inventors should be a piece of cake. Mei groaned and her shoulders slumped as the panic energy finally started ebbing away. Yeah, we can do this. We'll be fine. We'll be fine. Why are you guys even packing anyway? Hitoshi asked. Internships don't start until next week. Izuku shrugged. Mei-chan was nervous. Ah. Hitoshi nodded. That makes sense. Hey. Mei pouted. Don't put this all on me, Izuku. Izuku just gave her a cheeky smile and shrug, making her pout harder, before turning back to Hitoshi. You don't have to help us pack, you know. School ended 2 hours ago, so your family's probably wondering where you were by now. I'm, Hitoshi grimaced. I'm kinda avoiding going home right now. Izuku tilted his head in confusion. What? Why? Well, it's kinda complicated. Hitoshi explained. I've been in the foster system for a while, which whatever, it is what it is, but when I got into the hero course, apparently Nedzu wanted the teachers to keep a closer eye on me. Probably because I'm gonna be getting more dangerous training now, I guess. Anyway, I'm living with Eraserhead and present Mike now. Izuku and Mei just blinked at him, processing what he said for a long moment before Izuku spoke up quietly. What do you mean keep an eye on you? Hitoshi shrugged. You know, keep me from going villain and stuff. What? Ochako followed the directions the email had given her carefully, triple-checking them when she realized that the beach park she'd been told to go to was actually a dump. Her mind wild with questions. First of all, why would All Might insist on having a private meeting with her? Second of all, why not have that meeting on campus like a teacher normally would? And last of all, if they couldn't meet on campus, why meet at a dump? She didn't even know where in the dump she was supposed to meet him. For some reason, she thought he'd just be there, but now that she was here, she couldn't see him anyway. Maybe she'd gotten the wrong address after all? She picked her way around the trash piles for a few minutes, wondering whether she should just give up and email him an apology for missing their meeting. She had to be in the wrong place, right? Suddenly, she heard a voice behind her. I am here. Ochako jumped and fell on her butt, scrambling away as quickly as she could before her brain caught up that it was just All Might. She blushed and cringed as she slowly got to her feet and started brushing sand off her pants. Sorry, All Might. You snuck up on me, I guess. It's not that bad. He muttered. I'm used to it, Izuku, so just drop it. It makes sense, okay? I'm fine. None of this is fine, Toshi-kun. Mei growled. And if the rat thinks that he can get away with treating you like this, just because of a quirk, then he'd better say goodbye to all 4 of his walls. And his tail. I believe I understand what is happening. Nedzu said calmly, not even responding to Mei's threat as he leaned over and activated the intercom. Aizawa, Yamada, please come to my office immediately, thank you. If anything, that just made his kidnappers even angrier and Hitoshi flinched as Mei's grip on his arm got tighter. If you're calling the heroes to hurt Toshi-kun, I assure you that I would never do anything to hurt young Shinso. Nedzu raised his paws consolingly. I'm afraid that there has been a rather unfortunate understanding, one that I must admit I am at least partially responsible for. I ask that you be patient for just a bit longer and that you trust all will be explained momentarily. Izuku looked at him suspiciously, and why should we trust you? Nedzu looked him in the eyes as he responded seriously, because Shinso is not the one we meant to lie to. That calmed Izuku and Mei down, at least for the moment. Hitoshi was still confused and embarrassed, but he wasn't in trouble at least. At least, he didn't think so, but was Nedzu implying that he had meant to lie to someone? And what was the lie? They stood in tense silence for another minute or so before Aizawa and Mike walked through the door, immediately tensing up in response to the atmosphere in the room. Aizawa in particular looked like he was getting ready to fight if needed as his eyes flitted around the room, taking in every detail of the scene. Nedzu. Shinso. What's going on here? Aizawa. Nedzu said simply. Would you mind explaining why you and Yamada took custody of young Shinso here? Aizawa huffed, because his old foster parents were assholes who didn't let him talk at home, and he didn't deserve to live in a place like that. In addition to simply being a terrible environment for any growing teen, it wasn't conducive to his training as a hero. Is that all? Nedzu nodded and turned back to Izuku and Mei. I had thought the ruse was obvious, but in hindsight, I suppose we underestimated the depth and severity of young Shinso's past treatment and how that must have affected how he would see the situation. Due to a few legal limitations, we needed the permission of his previous guardians to remove Shinso from their care, and the easiest way to get that was to play into their own fears and biases. I assure you that we never intended to harm him in any way. Mei looked between Nedzu, Aizawa, and Mike suspiciously. So you didn't take custody of him because you thought he was going to snap and turn into a villain? Heavens no. Mike yelled, losing control of his quirk and making Aizawa activate his quirk for a split second to prevent them all from going deaf. Sorry, but there's no way we'd ever treat the little listener like that. We were trying to get him out of that situation, not make it worse. Hitoshi didn't know how he was supposed to feel. They didn't hate him. They didn't think he was just a villain in the making. They thought he deserved better than to be treated with suspicion and were doing their best to protect him despite their limitations, just like Mei and Izuku were doing. He felt relieved, but also. He was an idiot. Oh, Izuku turned red and both he and Mei looked embarrassed as the rage finally left them. Sorry. I guess we overreacted a little. Just a little? Hitoshi elbowed Mei in the side. Mei? Sorry for barging into your office. Mei grumbled. Hitoshi raised an eyebrow and? She sighed, and sorry for threatening to destroy your office. And other things. Nedzu smiled gently, no offense taken. I am wonderfully impressed by how protective you are of young Shinso. He needs friends like you. Hitoshi almost smiled, and he felt like he was about to pass out as all the stress finally left him. I think I'm ready to go home now. Is that all right? Aizawa and Yamada both exchanged a look before Aizawa looked him straight in the eye and responded. Yeah, kid, that's all right. Let's get you home. Chapter 43. Expectations. Ochako felt disgusting. She was nauseous, and it wasn't even from her quirk. No, it was because she was a terrible human being and felt like she was lying to everyone around her. She wasn't trying to. It wasn't like she was working with the villains or anything but. Well, she must have done something to trick All Might into thinking she was actually worthy of being his successor, or he wouldn't have offered her his quirk. The motion of the train should have been calming. Shinso was asleep next to her, slumped down in his seat as they made their way to Gunhead's agency, but Ochako just couldn't stop thinking that he would make a much better holder of one for all than she would. Anyone in their class would have been a better choice, because at least they actually had heroic motivations. She had decided to become a hero to make money, for goodness sake. Her reasons for becoming a hero were inherently selfish, and for some reason she'd been an idiot and thought she'd be able to get away with that. All Might, however, deserved a successor who was actually heroic, and not just some poor girl who wanted to be rich. As flattered as she was by the offer, Ochako knew that she didn't deserve to be the symbol of peace. And that was at the crux why she felt so terrible right now. All Might hadn't been trying to pressure her, she knew that, but he was the #1 hero. She'd looked up to him her entire life, and here he was, giving her the offer of a lifetime, an offer that anyone and their dog would be ecstatic about getting. An offer that she would have been ecstatic about getting if she could just stop feeling like an imposter. Receiving One for All was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and anyone would count themselves lucky to get offered a quirk with unimaginable power, especially from, objectively, the best hero to ever live. How was she supposed to just turn her nose up at that? She didn't want to look ungrateful or presumptuous, like she didn't need All Might's power. And he was the #1 hero, so she couldn't just tell him he'd made a mistake in choosing her because he was the symbol of peace and she was just a first-year hero student with no idea what she was doing. All Might didn't make mistakes, and even if he did, she hadn't earned the right to call him out on them. All might have phrased it as a question, but at the same time, it felt like an offer she couldn't just refuse. Ochako hadn't known how to say no. So she hadn't. She vaguely remembered sputtering out an appropriately polite response, but everything had been happening too fast and the only thing she could do was fall back on being polite to try to hide the way she was panicking inside. One thing led to another, and before she was really able to process what was happening, All Might had given her a piece of his hair to eat, which was oddly enough one of the least weird parts of the entire experience, and then it was done. She had All Might's quirk. Ochako had spent every day just trying to keep her head above water. She had felt the unfamiliar power welling up in her a few times so far, but she'd shoved it down in a panic every time. She didn't deserve one for all. She shouldn't have ever accepted it, but she just hadn't known what else to do, and now it was too late to take it back. Last night, she'd woken up in the middle of a panic attack and had half-drafted an email to All Might trying to convince him to take the quirk back before she'd realized that she didn't even know if that was possible, and even if it was, she probably shouldn't be talking about one for all over email. She didn't know what to do. So instead, Ochako did the only thing she could do and tried to ignore the whole thing. She'd left on her planned internship and tried to put the whole symbol of peace thing out of her mind, thinking that maybe if she put it off for long enough, it would stop feeling like she was a liar and a fake. It hadn't worked yet, but hey, All Might had chosen her because she refused to give up, so there was always hope for tomorrow, right? The train started slowing down and Ochako shook Shinso awake. Hey, Shindig, it's our stop. Huh? Shinso blinked slowly and blearily sat up. Oh, we're here? Not quite. Ochako giggled. We've still got to walk to the agency. Awesome. Shinso stretched and stood up, grabbing his duffel as the train came to a stop. Well, let's get going. Ochako grabbed her duffel, pushing down one for all again as it tried to rear its head again. Yeah. Let's go be heroes. Little ways down. But I think the sign is a pretty good replacement, don't you think? Izuku looked where she was pointing and he smiled in excitement as he saw Midoriya and Hatsume written out in big block letters. The girl holding the sign was only a few years older than them, but from the way she was holding herself, she definitely knew her way around. Mei didn't waste any time grabbing Izuku's hand and dragging him toward her. Come on, Izuku. Mei whined. The sooner we get out of this airport, the sooner we can start making babies. To his surprise, the girl picking them up didn't even blush at Mei's loud outburst. She just laughed. Oh, you must be who I'm looking for. Uncle might mention you two were a bit high energy. Now, which one of you is Hatsume and which is Midoriya? I'm Midoriya. And this is Hatsume. Izuku introduced, keeping a tight hold on Mei's hand to keep her from leaping at the ride, which was a distinct possibility considering how her eyes were zooming in on every piece of potential tech the girl was wearing, from her glasses to her earrings. Thank you so much for the opportunity to intern here. We're so excited to see everything that Island has to offer. Are those tracking earrings? Mei interrupted. They've got microchips in them, but do they just track or do they do something else? The girl laughed. They're not trackers, they're actually a prototype I'm working on for civilian support. I'm hoping to have them be an early warning sign for panic attacks, if I can tweak them just right, and maybe even help counteract them, but maybe you'll be able to help with that. Mei's eyes widened and Izuku could feel her practically vibrating next to him. I will take that as a challenge. Come on, Izuku. We're burning daylight. You work in a lab, Mei. You don't need natural light. Izuku shook his head as Mei pulled him along, their ride following along beside them. And besides, you don't even know where the car is. We didn't even ask our ride her name. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I forgot to introduce myself. The girl smiled kindly and skipped ahead so she could stop in front of them, holding her hand out for a handshake. I'm Melissa Shield. Welcome to Island. Chapter 44. Relativity. Over here. It's a little too far from the water tank to be effective. Dr. Shield smiled. Good work. You pass. May didn't even look up as she kept fiddling with the device. Pass? It's a test that Dad gives newcomers. Melissa explained. Let them handle an old invention and see if they can point out what's wrong with it. Old invention? May put the device back on the table. That means there's new, improved versions of this baby. Where are they? Can I see them? They're all around you. Dr. Shield gestured widely to the whole room. I designed the entire climate control system for this building and most of the other buildings on this island. Never greenlight an invention you're not willing to use yourself, right? Right. May grinned. So, what's the plan? I can't wait to start making babies with all these fun toys. Are we gonna be building robots? Networking? What are we doing? A little bit of all of it, honestly. Dr. Shield said. It's getting late, so tonight, we'll just let you get familiar with the lab where you'll be spending most of your time, and then tomorrow, we'd like you each to choose a project to work on this week. We'll help you out with design and troubleshooting and basically workshop it all together. Does that sound good? May grabbed Izuku's hand and started pulling him from the room. Let's go, Izuku. We're wasting baby-making time. But May-chan. Izuku yelled at her as the shields laughed behind them. You don't even know where we're going. Tenya turned down his covers and resisted the urge to beat up the pillow he'd been provided by Manuel's agency. Half a day in Hosu and he hadn't seen any sign of the hero killer. He couldn't have moved on to another city, not with only one victim here, so he had to be around and Tenya would find him. He took a deep breath. He just had to be patient. Stain was a master at laying low, so it was understandable that he was still hiding in the shadows. He had all week to find him, so he just had to be patient. Ochako had woken up refreshed and exhilarated, ready for another day of sparring and maybe even a patrol or two if they were lucky. The worries and insecurities were still there, obviously, as was one for all, but she was able to let all of that fade into the background as she focused on everything she was here to learn. Most of the other interns were already there when she stepped into the kitchen. Good morning. Good morning, Uraraka. Shinso grinned. How'd you sleep? Like someone knocked me out. Ochako answered. It was amazing. Well, I'm glad you're finally here to make us breakfast. One of the other interns laughed. I mean, the woman's place is in the kitchen, so I don't know what took you so long. Ochako stopped and stared at him, as did the other interns. Shinso gave the kid a long, disappointed look before sighing. Would you care to repeat that? Come on, guys, it's a joke. The kid rolled his eyes. You know, 'cause she's the only girl. It's not like I actually expect her to make breakfast for all of us, though I wouldn't complain. Yeah, that's enough. Shinso took a sip of his coffee as the kid's body went slack under his control. Misogyny isn't a funny joke, and Uraraka has every right to slap you for that, but let's save her the effort, yeah? Slap yourself in the face and then wake up. There was a slap and a chorus of laughter from the rest of the watching interns as the kid woke up and started stuttering out an apology. Ochako caught Shinso smiling, even though he tried to hide it by taking another sip of coffee. She shook her head and rolled her eyes at him, but he just grinned wider and took another sip of coffee. She still couldn't believe that he was becoming a hero out of spite, but from what she knew of him, it made sense and honestly, maybe part of the reason he was such a strong hero was because he was constantly having to stand up for himself and do things his own way. It was admirable and he made it work, despite how it might sound to someone who didn't know him. Ochako didn't know if she could do the same. She still felt really guilty about wanting to be a hero just for money, but maybe if she talked to May about it, she might be able to give it a chance, at least. Ochako still wasn't sure if Shinso was telling the truth about Mei being motivated by money too, but if he was, then at least maybe she'd know she wasn't alone. She let her insecurities fade into the background as Gunhead led them through warm-ups and ordered them to spar. Ochako grinned at Shinso and he looked bored, but at this point, she was about 75% sure that meant he was actually taking her seriously. She charged first, going through the movements that Gunhead had taught them yesterday and forcing Shinso to take a step back before he was able to move to counter her. She still felt like a fake, but the repetitive movement and action helped. The trade-off, of course, was that One for All seemed to wake up as soon as she was in any sort of combat situation, but she was confident that she could make it stay where she wanted it to. She launched a punch at Shinso and was unsurprised when he sidestepped her and grabbed her arms. She felt One for All well up in her as he followed through with the move and started forcing her to the floor, but she pushed it away. Maybe after she talked to Mei, she'd be able to. Her eyes widened as she felt One for All push back. She tried to stamp down on the power like she had been doing for days now, but this time, the power was like a tsunami, and whatever control she'd assumed she had over it was washed away as she felt gravity shift. David Shield tinkered away in his private lab, working on an actual project this time. He had been impressed that the Hastum girl didn't even need prompting to tell him what was wrong with the invention, and he was excited to see what she would choose for her project this week. Nedzu had warned him that Midoriya would seem quiet in comparison, but that he was just as smart and observant as Hatsume was, if not even more so they should give him a quirk or a computer program to work on rather than discounting him. David was sure the boy would get along well with their analysts, so he wasn't too concerned. If Nedzu said the boy was smart, David wasn't stupid enough to think he was anything less than a genius. Suddenly, there was a crash and David jumped to his feet to see a young girl in what looked to be a hero costume steadying herself against the table. She looked up at him with wide eyes for a moment, and he only briefly noticed that she looked both green and absolutely exhausted before she stumbled quickly toward the nearest trash can and started puking her guts out. He was torn about whether he should comfort her or call security, and he ended up just staring at her in shock as she hunched over and grabbed her stomach. How had she gotten in? She felt vaguely familiar, but then again, she was also a teenage girl that looked like every other teenage girl he'd ever seen, so he didn't trust that enough for it to do any good, especially since she had somehow gotten into his private office. There were 2 layers of security just outside the door, and then she would have had to bypass even more security to enter the building, and that's not even counting getting onto the island, and yet he was fairly certain that the only teenagers authorized to get on the island this week were his interns, which, considering that he didn't even know who this girl was, meant that there was something really wrong with their security. After a minute, the girl finally stopped puking, and she looked up at him, her voice scratchy and barely there from exhaustion. That wasn't supposed to happen. He lunged forward just in time to keep the poor girl from slamming her head against the floor as she passed out. Questions whirled in his brain as he pulled out his phone. Who was she? How had she gotten here? What was supposed to happen? The line only rang twice before someone picked up, and David finally managed to pull his gaze away from her and look around the room. Yes, island security? We have a level 7 security risk. Put the island on lockdown. Chapter 45. Missing. What do you mean she disappeared? Shota was about to tear his hair out. Shinso, she doesn't have an invisibility quirk or anything. She can't just disappear. Well, I don't know what to tell you, because one minute, I had her in a capture hold, and the next thing I know, I was holding air. Shinso sounded like he was freaking out, which was perfectly understandable, considering the circumstances. She just popped out of existence with zero warning. We've torn the entire agency apart and we still can't find her. Oh, okay. Shota took a deep breath. Okay. Uraraka's missing. We can deal with this. Gunhead's already on the phone with Nedzu, correct? Yeah. Shinso almost sounded like he was about to cry. You'll find her, right? Shota swallowed. We'll certainly try. He hung up and rubbed his temples. Of all the things he'd expected to deal with on internships, a missing student wasn't one of them. Noise complaints, behavior recommendations, maybe even a villain attack, that was all within the realm of possibility, but a student going missing. It was every teacher's worst nightmare, and to make it even worse, they had zero leads because she'd gone missing from a secure hero agency in full view of a pro hero and a half dozen other interns, and no one had seen anything. He didn't even know where to start. His phone rang again, and he picked it up without looking. Shinso, if this is about Uraraka, it hasn't been long enough for us to find anything yet. Well, this is about Uraraka. Nedzu's voice sounded grim. But I believe there is one lead you need to be informed of. Izuku hopped up on the desk next to Mei, who was currently welding something or another. Wasn't Dr. Shield supposed to be here already? Who cares? Mei shrugged. If he needed to unlock the lab, that'd be a different story, but if we're just picking a project to work with anyway, then it doesn't really matter when he shows up. I guess, Izuku said slowly, going back to his laptop. I've been thinking about what I want to do, and I'm not sure whether I want to do some sort of mapping software or maybe something to help with those earrings Melissa was wearing. Having an early warning sign for panic attacks sounds like a really useful technology. What are you working on? Right now? Mei tightened one last screw and pushed her newest baby to the side. Nothing. But that was basically a portable artificial sun. I got the idea from that bird boy in Shinso's new class. There might be all sorts of other quirks sensitive to light. Cool. Izuku grinned and got out his notebook. That would be really useful for a lot of heroes. Do you think there's an advantage to having it spherical, or would it work better as a flashlight? What about? He was cut off by his phone ringing. He looked at Mei to see if she knew who was calling, but she just shrugged and started taking her new invention apart, so Izuku just picked it up. Hello? Izuku? Hitoshi sounded panicked on the other end of the phone, and Izuku immediately put down his notebook and waved Mei over. You've got that whole man-in-chair thing going on, so you know how to keep secrets, right? Yeah? Izuku put the phone on speaker as Mei came to stand beside him. You're on speaker with Mei, by the way. What's wrong? Well, Hitoshi's voice became a little softer. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, because it would be really bad if the media found out right now, so. But, I know that you know a lot about quirks and thought maybe you'd have come across this one or something like it. I just don't know what to. Take a deep breath, extra credit, Kun. Mei instructed. We're right here and the media are boring, so we're not gonna tell them, and you know we can keep a secret. Otherwise Izuku would probably be dead, so let's see if we can help. Izuku nodded in agreement. Take your time. Well, Hitoshi groaned. You know how I'm interning at the same place as Uraraka, right? Izuku and Mei exchanged a confused glance. Yeah, why? We can't find her. Instantly, Izuku and Mei both sat up ramrod straight. What? On the other end of the phone, Hitoshi sighed. She just disappeared in the middle of a spar. 1 minute I had her in a hole, in the next, she's just nowhere. Izuku ran to the nearest computer, and there wasn't any purple mist, right? That's what happened at the USJ, so try to remember. No? Hitoshi took a deep breath. She was just gone. Wait, I might have seen a little bit of some sort of greenish glow? Or maybe it was pink. That might have been a trick of the light though, and there definitely wasn't a purple mist or anything. Does that sound like any quirk you've come across? No. Izuku frowned and typed a few things into his search. And from what I can see, it's not on the quirk registry either. Most warp quirks have some visual indication that they're being activated, and if she were attacked by a villain, you would have seen that. We hadn't even left the agency. Hitoshi insisted. There were no villains. Izuku sighed. I'm sorry we couldn't help more. We'll keep thinking and get back to you if we come up with anything. Thanks. Hitoshi sighed. I mean, Aizawa and Nedzu are already working on it too, so hopefully we'll find her soon. Let us know, Mei said. Gravity-chan is way too nice to just disappear off the face of the earth. Will do, Hitoshi said. Thanks, guys. Yeah. Izuku hung up and looked at Mei. I wish there was something more we could do. What can we do, Izuku? Mei whined. We're on a floating island hours away from Japan. I guess, Izuku bit his lip. Well, back to work? Mei nodded and picked up her screwdriver grimly. Back to work. Shota figured he should be getting used to getting angry on behalf of his students by this point. So you're telling me that you not only gave my student an extra quirk without informing me, but that this impossible miracle quirk has painted a target on her back a mile wide because it comes with a nemesis that runs the goddamn League of Villains. Oh, and considering that she disappeared into thin air, they're probably the ones who took her, especially since you didn't even give her any extra security after handing her a giant I am here sign. Am I missing anything, All Might? All Might cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, I had not anticipated them finding her this soon. Shota glared at him. Well, they did, so what now? Now, we do everything in our power to find her. Nedzu said calmly, a cup of long cold tea on the desk beside him. What's done is done, Aizawa. Uraraka is gone, and dwelling on the past and what should or should not have been done will not help us get her back. My only issue is that no one present saw any signs of Kurogiri. Tsukauchi said. Even when we asked specifically about Purple Mist, everyone present said that they didn't see anything like that and none of them were lying. So do we think the League got their hands on another warp quirk? All Might ask. With All for One at the helm, it is a possibility. There's also the possibility that she wasn't taken by the League at all. Tsukauchi pointed out. We can't afford to get our hopes up for that. Shota said. Out of all the possibilities we've considered, the most likely is that Uraraka was kidnapped by the League because this blonde oaf decided to give them an incentive to do so. All Might sighed, I know. Shota noticed that Nedzu had been suspiciously silent and found him staring grimly at his screen. He wasn't sure how this situation could get worse, but he had the sinking suspicion that he was about to find out. Nedzu. What's wrong? I just received an email from Island security team, where Midoriya and Hatsume are interning. Nedzu turned to stare at them. There was a security breach. The entire island is now in lockdown. After 2 hours of waiting in the lab and working on various projects, Izuku decided it was high time to go find out what was going on, if only because he was getting restless just sitting at a computer screen when he knew one of his friends had gone missing, so he left Mei working in the lab and started trying to find Dr. Shield. So far, he'd just been wandering the halls, but the few people he'd seen had looked worried for some reason and had been too busy to talk to him. Eventually, he'd found someone who was able to point him toward Melissa's room, so right now, he was hoping she'd be able to either take him to her dad or at least tell him why no one had even peeked their head in on them all morning. He was just a few halls down from where he'd been told to go when he caught sight of Melissa, and to make it better, her dad was walking beside her. Izuku waved wildly and started running toward them. Hey. Melissa. Dr. Shield. Oh, Midoriya. Dr. Shield's shoulders were slumped and he looked much more tired than he had when Izuku had seen him last night. Sorry, I never showed up this morning. I should have sent one of the other inventors in my place, but we've all been working overtime. Well, everything. The current situation has thrown all of us for a loop. But what is the current situation? Izuku asked. Because if there is one, no one's told us anything about it. The island is currently in lockdown. Melissa explained. I was just on my way to let you know. We had an intruder come into Dad's lab a few hours ago, and until we're sure how she got in, no one's allowed on or off the island, and communication is limited as well. It's kinda a mess right now, but if it helps keep everyone here safe, then it's worth it, right? Izuku nodded, right. Did they get through by hacking or was it some kind of quirk? I know you probably have a lot better analysts and programmers than everyone here, but if there's anything I can do to help. Dr. Shield shared a look with Melissa before he turned to Izuku. Honestly, we have no idea. It could be a quirk or it could be some tech we've never seen before. She just popped into existence right in front of me. No warning, no indication that anything or anyone would be arriving. Honestly, our scientists would be absolutely ecstatic about having a mystery to solve if it weren't such a threat to the safety of the island. Izuku nodded. Yeah, I can see why that. Wait, did you say just popped into existence? Melissa nodded. Dad was the only one there, but when we played it back on the cameras, 1 minute the room was empty. The next she was stumbling into the table and puking her guts out into the nearest trash bin before she passed out. We've given her medical attention, but so far, nobody knows who she is or how she got into his lab. Dr. Shield groaned. Our only lead is that she was wearing what looked to be a hero uniform at the time. We're waiting to hear back from the company that produced it, but it doesn't match any licensed heroes. Because she doesn't have a hero license yet. Izuku muttered. Dr. Shield stopped. What? Izuku's mind was racing. If his suspicions were correct, then how in the world had Uraraka gotten all the way to Island in just a couple of hours? It had taken him and May over 3 hours to fly here, and he didn't even know exactly where here was. Still, as impossible as it sounded, Shinso had described her disappearance in the same way that Dr. Shield had described the intruder's entrance. Here one moment, gone the next. And the after effects of Uraraka's quirk would explain the extreme nausea and vomiting when she'd arrived. Was there a sort of weird greenish-pink glow? Izuku asked finally. It would have been really faint, almost to the point where you'd think it was a trick of the light. Dr. Shield looked at Melissa, who nodded. When I was watching the video, I thought it was just a lens flare. She explained. It faded pretty much as soon as she appeared though, so it only lasted a second or two. Why? Dr. Shield asked. Do you know what's going on? Oh, I don't have a clue. Izuku answered. But I'd like to see her, if possible. I think I might know who she is. Ochako was exhausted. She didn't think she'd ever felt this tired and gross in her entire life, but even with all that, there was still too much energy vibrating inside her, and she kept her eyes screwed shut, hoping that if she could just keep it all in, then maybe it would go away and she'd be able to fall asleep again. She really hoped that the last thing she remembered was actually a weird dream, because if it wasn't then she didn't know where she was on top of everything else, but if she just kept her eyes shut and pretended to be asleep, then she could just pretend she was safe in Gunhead's agency and wouldn't ever have to know the difference. A door opened and she heard a few people walk into the room before an unfamiliar voice started speaking. She seems to be suffering from quirk exhaustion, but since we're not sure what her quirk is, then there's no way of knowing whether that's from coming here or if it's from whatever she was doing before. Well, this is interesting. This voice was familiar and Ochako's eyes shot open. The room spun as she sat up too quickly, but she was too relieved to care. Midoriya smiled at her. Hey there, Uraraka. You're not supposed to be here.